Alright, well, here we are. Levels 4 and 5 I'm gonna do. Before we shift there, I just want to say something about level 9, which is known as the military base. And that level was done by John Romero. And I don't particularly like it, I think, because of the lack of detail. It's very square. And I think my suspicion is that it was originally designed really with multiplayer in mind, because there were no designated multiplayer maps. They were just the single player maps. But yeah, also you can see me die in that nukage pit. But we shall go now to map 4, which was, it's called Command Control. And it's by Tom Hall, at least primarily by Tom Hall. And his maps are not very well revered among Doom fans. And this is only one of his 2 maps in the episode. The other one is the final level. But in a lot of ways, this is very similar in style to the other levels, so it's hard to say to what extent John Romero touched it up and to what extent it was in the original design. But the problem with a lot of Tom Hall's designs is just that they were incomplete. They didn't have the kind of bells and whistles that the John Romero ones could benefit from. So that means that a lot of his maps that are later on in the game, like in episode 2, maybe have interesting spaces and have kind of wacky uses of textures, but they don't have that worked through feeling that the John Romero maps do, because they weren't, finished to completion by Tom Hall. So I think that's more just that he didn't finish working on them, than necessarily having anything to do with him, his style not being as refined. But yeah, this level, I liked it for some reason when I was younger. I think I didn't like the spooky levels. This level is not nearly as spooky as the one before or after. It's sort of a breather almost, and the spaces are bigger. You've kind of arrived at a transitional sort of impasse space, and there are a lot of the things that you see in previous maps, like the kind of texturing that's there, and the interconnectedness with this entrance room, which almost feels like, even though it's sort of the backbone of the level, kind of feels like the most like the rest of the episode of anything. And here's this big empty room, which you don't really see much of in this episode. There's a lot of angles on walls and little details and texturing and stuff, but the rooms are bigger and emptier. Here is the first key area, and it's kind of I'm gonna guess that the function of this door is like the command control thing, where you're opening one door and it opens all 4, like it's the master door or something. But it's hard to tell exactly. It's not really exactly made to look like anything in particular. You just kind of have to guess at what its function is. It just doesn't seem completely worked through, as I would say a lot of the maps or a lot of the areas in this level do. Like here, there is that interesting kind of ugly carpet texture that does distinguish this from the levels that were before it, and they could sort of get away with it because it's such a low resolution, so it kind of looks like you're swimming in it or something, but it doesn't have nearly the kind of interesting geometry or interesting lighting or sector work that define, the other maps in this episode. But here's one of the more interesting areas. There's a path to the exit that's blocked off by those bars, and here's the obligatory computer area. There has to be one in every level in this episode with blinking lights. This apparently used to be a swastika in an earlier version of the map, but that wouldn't really make very much sense, just a holdover from Wolfenstein. But I do want to, even though Tom Hall's map here isn't as strong, I do want to defend him, because he was my favorite designer growing up and responsible for a vast majority of the Commander Keen and Wolfenstein levels, and there's some tremendously imaginative Wolfenstein levels, so and almost all of them are from him, so he has to be credited for that. This just wasn't his project, clearly. That area that we were just in is the exit area, and you can see it's very similar to the exit area of map 3, where there's kind of a three-pronged passageway, and there's this stairway in the middle. This time, though, it's a smaller area, and you have to raise the stairway with a switch, so it's kind of presenting something that you've seen before, but in a slightly different way. There's a twist on it, which you see a lot of. Here, this is kind of maybe in shape, like if you look at it from the auto map, reminiscent of the maze in map 2, but it's very cramped and claustrophobic. You kind of are in like this attic space, and you're only fighting monsters, in particular those demons, which make this difficult, as well as the toxic barrels, which are just placed pretty liberally throughout this whole map. And yeah, you can see the texture changed a little bit here. Maybe that's just to distinguish this area, because again, there were a lot of signposts for navigation, because navigating in a space like this was just so new. There wasn't really anything like this that came before it. So yeah, this is where we can see in the window, and it walks us up to that little barred off area that we saw. And that's something that viewing later areas accessible from the beginning, that's something that goes back to Wolfenstein, and I'm sure it's just a general design trope, but something that I notice a lot in both Doom and Wolfenstein. I'm just gonna run back through just to get one more secret here that I missed, which is the Soul Sphere, and doesn't quite have the aura that the Soul Sphere has on level 3, because it isn't illuminated with that nice happy light. But yeah, this is kind of a weird disused side room. It's just big and empty. Usually it would be littered with toxic waste barrels or some other kind of details, in a John Romero map, but it's kind of empty, which is actually an interesting contrast. But yeah, this is the secret, and if you hit that switch and don't get on that platform right away, like I just did, then you won't be able to get back up. It only goes up once. And so I'm going to cheat and no clip to get up there, and it'll take me forever. But yeah, that's an interesting way to make a secret more difficult, kind of intimidating too. And maybe that's, that might have been against a design principle, in that you might want secrets to be accessible all the time, but it does add to like a finality to it. It's like, nope, you fucked up, so you can't do it. You can't go back. But yeah, it's maybe appropriate just to comment on the fact that that window at the top is the only area that you see of the outside, and the only thing that really ties it to the previous levels, really. There's no windows outside, and therefore you don't go outside, but there are lots of interconnected spaces and windows into other rooms, like in the other John Romero maps. And I don't know if that design was partly for multiplayer or partly just that's how that was part of the design, but it's so different from what you see in AAA games now. And it's really what distinguishes Doom now is the approach to level design. The non-linear open approach is just vastly different. So now we're going to Phobos Lab, the weird alien-looking things, and this is where things get a little spooky. This is the view that you see in the initial demo on any version of the game, I think. So it's the most Doom that you can get. There's that big pit of toxic waste that there are no suits to navigate through, so you just have to run past. And also it runs under the wall, suggesting that it's running to some place kind of much deeper. And the funny thing is, if you look at it in the map, it doesn't really run anywhere, but it's just, that's not important. It's just that it suggests that it's running somewhere. And this main start area kind of has a weird shape, but is actually connects up to so many different areas just in a way that's not nearly as apparent as in the previous level is so rectangular, and you see all the entrances into the rooms, and here it's very broken up, sort of like the computer base level, episode 1 mission 5. And also this map, or this area, is very reminiscent of a later area in the computer base that is also on the far right of the map. So there's almost a direct reference, I have to say. And this room might be an analog to well, there's a secret behind the barrels, by the way. But yeah, this room might be an analog to the entrance room in in the previous level, if only because there are windows on either sides on the top and an entrance in the middle. There are just several different connections up to previous areas, and it's open. It's very open, and I think maybe one of the reasons why it's open to this guy is just because it looks better that way, but it also might match with the weird alien-looking structure where there's little pods from a main central hub that's on the auto map. Maybe that's the hub, although it's hard to know if those things are meant to correspond at all, because those images were reused somewhat for episode 2. So yeah, this key area connects to an area that you haven't seen yet, but we'll see shortly. And you know, those two things didn't really have to be connected to each other, but that's one of the things about Doom, is that if it's possible to show the relationship between the spaces, you might as well do it, because it adds this kind of depth, and you see how these structures are connected. It's part of understanding the spaces and making them feel alive, and not just like they're set pieces, because that's what so many modern games feel like. You know, you go to spaces that are supposedly realistic in games like Call of Duty or whatever, and they're just all set pieces. They don't have this interlocking relationship with each other. They don't feel like a functional space, even when they're supposed to. And that's the thing that distinguishes Doom, even though it's very abstract and you interact with so little, and yet it feels like a functional space. This elevator down is reminiscent of map 2, Into a Confrontation. And here is a circular room that you're going down the stairs to. Again, sort of a map 2 kind of idea. You're going down the stairs to a big confrontation. So this map, I'd say, definitely does borrow a lot of ideas previously learned and used in maps that you've seen. And this is a secret, a pentagram, which is the first teleporter that you've seen, and kind of suggests some kind of sinister nature, which matches with this map being darker and more sinister seeming. There being like these labs having these experiments that maybe you're not supposed to know about, and maybe they're not supposed to be in plain view. But turning around does indeed put you into a confrontation situation, again with more barrels that make it difficult, but can be helpful, as you see. And there's a gotcha, not quite as obvious as one, but kind of a more steady trickling of enemies in an area where you don't really have cover, because you can't go into that pit of toxic waste and cover, so you're without means to defend yourself. And that's again what happens at the end of this level in a very spooky, epic, whatever you want to call it, confrontation that happens at the end. And this just lowers down these columns that you can climb up to the secrets, and you have to commend John Romero for putting so much effort into making these secrets be part of the levels and to be accessible, because it really does make it feel like there's this unknowable depth to a lot of the levels. Like there are all these parts and pieces of spaces that you're not seeing. And here's again is another secret where you can go outside. And the interesting thing here to me is how the wall is much shorter and the texture on the outside is different. It makes it feel like this is some kind of clandestine complex tucked away in like this concrete bunker. And there's might be something slightly sadistic happening here. But yeah, this once you're done with that, it sends you back up and it activates a staircase like the staircase in map 4, actually, or map 3, but this time it's in the middle of the level, and it connects you up through the center. And also like the secret, actually, the entrance to the secret in map 3. So there are a lot of uses of techniques that are done over and over again, which is interesting. And here's the obligatory computer room again that comes in 2/3 of the way through the map. And like I think I said this before, it kind of does feel like a lot of these spaces were just built over these massive computer rooms, and that you're just seeing parts and pieces of them with each map that you progress through until finally you reach kind of the central nervous system, which is the next 2 levels. In particular map 7, which is called the computer zone, or the computer base, or I forget the name. But yeah, that sends you back in this dark, disused hallway that you don't really know where it's going to be turning to, and then it just turns back onto the final side of that room that you were in, and that final window that you haven't been in. and it's continually sort of reasserting your relationship with the space. And then you have that tiny little pathway back down, which just leads you to a door, which leads to the end of the level. It doesn't look like anything particularly distinctive right now. It's just a small door, not a big door, but this area that it's in is very different and very scary. It's a dark hallway where the lights strobe very gradually, and if you turn the corner you can get a light amplification thing, but you might not see it, and actually I prefer to play without it just for atmospheric effect. But this room is kind of a circle. There are cover areas, but there are also lots of explosive barrels, and there's enemies that you can't really see. There are these invisible guys, and so there aren't really any safe places for cover. You just kind of have to do your best, and so this makes it a pretty sadistic confrontation, and something that's been the game has been building up to, kind of suggesting that you're going to be dealing with a lot more heavy stuff in the next few maps, and that does indeed come true, because the previous maps have had exit areas that are a lot more generous, and so there's no real precedent for a big, dark, scary hall like this, and so it's a real set piece event, and it kind of breaks up the episode from what came before and what came after. And I think it's appropriate because what comes after does change the tone and does show you a lot of what you've shown before, but it's kind of like you're entering in a portal and you're seeing all these different angles and sides to things that you've seen before in maps 6 and 7 and 8 too, I guess. Although 8 is kind of the epilogue to that. But yeah, I'm just going back through here so you can see the relationship between the space, also the lighting, which you don't maybe necessarily notice right away, but is very important in this map. The fact that it's open probably it's, like I said, just because it looks better that way, but it does feel like that central hub area. And yeah, the light. So the lighting is more subtle here, and there's a lot of low lighting that's more subtle, but it's definitely used to a good effect. And this strobing light, which you don't see a lot of, is obviously used as well as it really could be. So that's the end of level 5, and we will be going into the crazy multi-dimensional nightmares of map 6 and 7 later. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope that you're getting something out of it. So long.